Susan Pilley, a bright 23-year-old Indian student, thought New York was the land of opportunity, but her secret affair with a wealthy older man would turn her dreams into a nightmare she couldn't escape. She was only 23 when she landed in New York, carrying 2 suitcases and a lifetime of expectations. Back home in India, her family had celebrated her admission into an American university as a victory. She was seen as responsible, focused, and strong enough to handle life far from home. For her parents, this journey meant pride and sacrifice. For her, it meant pressure she never spoke about. At first, everything felt exciting. Tall buildings, crowded streets, and a sense of freedom filled her days. She attended classes regularly and tried to blend in. But the reality of living in New York slowly became heavier than she expected. Rent consumed most of her savings. Tuition deadlines arrived faster than she could earn money. Legal work limits for international students made things worse. Each month ended with anxiety and careful calculations. She avoided asking her family for help. They were already struggling to support her education. Late at night, while scrolling through her phone, she watched other students living comfortably, dining out, traveling, and wearing expensive clothes. The gap between her life and theirs grew wider. Loneliness added to the stress, especially during quiet evenings in her small apartment. It was during this vulnerable time that she stepped into unfamiliar online spaces. What began as harmless browsing slowly turned into private conversations. She was careful at first, knowing the risks, but desperation can blur judgment. An older man noticed her profile. He appeared polite, successful, and generous. His attention felt reassuring, especially to someone who felt invisible in a foreign city. The connection moved quickly but stayed hidden. She convinced herself it was temporary and harmless. Money started solving problems that had kept her awake for months. Bills were paid on time, stress eased. On the surface, her life seemed to improve. Her attendance at university stabilized and her appearance changed. No one questioned the sudden calm. What she did not fully realize was how fast secrecy became routine. Her phone was always locked. She avoided sharing details of her personal life. She created excuses for sudden schedule changes. Every decision began to revolve around keeping one part of her life completely separate from the rest. Inside, fear quietly replaced relief. She knew she was crossing lines she never planned to cross. Each step forward made it harder to turn back. The city that once symbolized freedom now felt like a maze with no clear exit. She believed she was in control, but the balance was already shifting. Chapter 1 of her New York life did not end with success or stability. It ended with silence, hidden choices, and a path she never imagined taking when she first stepped onto American soil. The arrangement did not begin in a dramatic way. It grew slowly, shaped by convenience and need. The older man presented himself as someone who understood her struggles. He knew the cost of living in New York and the pressure faced by international students. His support came without questions at first, and that made it feel safe. Money arrived regularly, solving problems that once felt impossible. Soon, her life started changing in visible ways. She moved to a better apartment closer to campus. She dressed with more confidence and no longer avoided social spaces. To outsiders, it looked like she had adjusted well to life abroad. No one suspected that her comfort depended on a secret she carried every day. What she did not notice at first was the shift in control. Meetings were no longer flexible. Locations were chosen for privacy, not comfort. She was advised to stay off social media and limit contact with people who might ask questions. The man insisted on discretion, reminding her how much was at stake if anyone found out. His tone remained calm, but the message was clear. The financial support became a leash. When she hinted at independence or delayed a meeting, payments slowed. This created fear. Tuition deadlines and rent were always near, and uncertainty made her anxious. She learned to stay silent and agree, convincing herself it was temporary. Each compromise felt small, but together they formed a trap. Her emotional state grew complicated. Gratitude mixed with discomfort, relief mixed with shame. She avoided thinking about the future because it felt unclear and unsafe. At the same time, she began documenting everything. Screenshots of transactions, travel details, and private images were stored carefully. She told herself it was just for security, something she might never need. The man, however, noticed changes. He sensed distance. His behavior became stricter. He asked questions about her daily routine and her university schedule. He wanted reassurance that she was still under control. What once felt like protection now felt like surveillance. Despite this, she started planning quietly. She applied for internships and researched legal work options. She dreamed of cutting ties once she could stand on her own. These plans gave her hope, but they also increased the risk. The more independent she became, the more dangerous the situation felt. By the end of this phase, the arrangement no longer resembled support. It had become a silent power struggle. She believed she was preparing an exit. He feared exposure, neither trusted the other anymore. What began as a solution to financial stress had turned into a situation filled with tension, secrets, and growing danger, setting the stage for what would follow next. The balance that once held everything together finally began to collapse. The student sensed it before anything visible happened. Messages felt heavier. Meetings carried an unspoken tension. The man's behavior shifted from control to restless, as if he were constantly calculating risk. Small changes in her routine no longer went unnoticed. A late response or a cancelled meeting triggered suspicion. At the same time, her determination to leave grew stronger. She had secured a possible internship interview and was close to stabilizing her finances without help. The idea of freedom felt near enough to touch. She reduced contact and delayed commitments, hoping distance would make the separation easier. Instead, it made the situation volatile. Unbeknownst to her, the man had begun digging. He feared betrayal more than anything else. His reputation, business connections, and family life depended on secrecy. During one visit, he noticed subtle signs that alarmed him. A locked folder on her laptop. Notifications that disappeared too quickly. Her guarded behavior confirmed his worst fear. The evidence she had saved, meant as protection, now became a threat. He understood that even a small leak could destroy him. Panic replaced patience. His movements became erratic, and his need for control intensified. He followed her schedule more closely, appearing unexpectedly and questioning her intentions without restraint. Her world started shrinking fast. She skipped classes to avoid attention and stopped responding to friends. Stress affected her sleep and focus. She sensed danger but underestimated how far it could go. The belief that she could manage the situation quietly kept her from seeking help. Then came the sudden silence. She missed deadlines. Emails went unanswered. Her phone location went inactive for hours at a time. Concern slowly spread among classmates, but no one imagined the worst. To most people, it looked like another overwhelmed student falling behind. When authorities were finally alerted, the discovery stunned everyone. Her apartment showed no signs of forced entry. Everything appeared arranged, almost deliberate. It was clear this was not a random act. The absence of struggle told a disturbing story of trust turned fatal. What shocked investigators most was how carefully the crime had been staged. Whoever was responsible believed they had removed every trace of involvement. Yet, beneath the surface, digital shadows remained. The silence that followed her disappearance was not emptiness. It was the calm after a storm built from fear, power, and desperation. Chapter 3 ended with the truth buried under layers of control and secrecy, waiting for someone to notice what did not belong. The investigation began cautiously, with authorities treating the case as an isolated incident. The apartment showed no forced entry, no signs of theft, and no immediate clues pointing to a suspect. Her personal belongings were untouched, and valuables remained in place. This quickly ruled out a random crime. Attention shifted to her personal life, which initially appeared quiet and unremarkable. University records showed irregular attendance in the days leading up to her death. Professors mentioned missed assignments and unanswered emails. Friends described her as stressed but private. She had not spoken openly about any serious problems. This lack of visible conflict made the case more puzzling and increased pressure on investigators to look deeper. The first major breakthrough came from her financial history. Bank statements revealed repeated transfers from an unfamiliar source, all carefully timed and substantial. These transactions did not match any scholarship, loan, or employment record. Investigators followed the trail and discovered a pattern of dependence that had never been disclosed. Digital analysis of her devices uncovered more. Hidden folders contained screenshots, location data, and personal records that painted a picture of a secret arrangement. The information was organized, suggesting she had been preparing for something. This evidence shifted the case from speculation to motive. Surveillance cameras around her apartment complex provided another critical piece. Footage showed a well-dressed older man entering the building close to the estimated time of death. He left hours later, calm and unhurried. His presence contradicted earlier assumptions and placed him directly in the timeline. As investigators identified the man, his public profile raised alarms. He was respected, wealthy, and well-connected. He denied involvement and claimed no meaningful connection to the student. However, phone records and location data contradicted his statements. Each denial created more suspicion. Forensic experts determined that the crime was calculated, not impulsive. The lack of struggle suggested familiarity and trust. Attempts had been made to erase digital traces, but complete deletion proved impossible. Small technical errors exposed deliberate actions. The investigation grew intense as pressure mounted. What initially seemed like a quiet student tragedy became a case involving power, secrecy, and fear. With every discovery, the narrative changed. The image of a vulnerable student collided with that of a man desperate to protect his world. By the end of this phase, the truth was no longer hidden. The evidence formed a clear pattern of control, panic, and violence. The case had fully transformed, revealing how a carefully maintained secret life had led to an irreversible outcome. The arrest came quietly, without spectacle. Authorities moved carefully, aware of the influence and resources the man possessed. What once protected him now worked against him. The evidence was too detailed, too connected, and too consistent to dismiss. Financial records, digital data, and surveillance footage formed a clear chain that pointed in one direction. The life he had carefully built over decades began to unravel within days. During legal proceedings, the depth of manipulation became clear. The relationship was not mutual power. It was control disguised as support. The student's dependence had been created step by step, reinforced through money, fear, and isolation. What the man believed was loyalty was actually silence forced by pressure. When that silence was threatened, he chose violence. The truth shocked both communities connected to the case. In New York, students began questioning how easily someone could disappear in plain sight. In India, her family struggled to understand the life she had been living. The image they held of her was real but incomplete. She had carried her burdens alone, believing it was the only way to survive. Media coverage spread quickly. Headlines focused on the scandal, the age gap, and the secret arrangement. But beneath the surface, the story was about vulnerability. An international student with limited options had been targeted by someone who understood her fear of failure and exposure. The imbalance was clear, and the consequences were devastating. The man was ultimately convicted, not because he was careless, but because no crime is perfect. Technology preserved what he tried to erase. The very systems he trusted to protect his privacy recorded his movements, payments, and timing. His attempt to silence one person exposed him completely. The case led to renewed conversations around student safety, financial pressure, and hidden exploitation. Universities faced criticism for not offering stronger support systems. Advocacy groups highlighted how loneliness and financial stress can push young people toward dangerous decisions. The tragedy became a warning rather than just a headline. For her family, justice did not bring peace, only answers. They learned that strength does not always look like success, and silence does not mean safety. Their daughter's story became a reminder of how easily dreams can be twisted when desperation meets control. The story ended where it began, with a young woman who wanted a better future. She did not seek danger, but it found her through promises that seemed harmless at first. This fictional case leaves behind one clear lesson. When power, secrecy, and fear combine, the cost is often paid by the most vulnerable, and the consequences are always permanent.